This is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. We are glad to welcome to our microphones today Dan Pilla. You know, this isn't just a new year. It's a new year where tax reform is now the law of the land. And some of you out there are beginning to wonder, what does this tax reform mean for me? How is it going to affect me and my taxes? And so we asked Dan to join us, and we're pleased he was able to do it. Dan's the author of 14 books and a frequent guest on TV. He is one of the country's leading experts on tax law and the IRS, and has helped countless individuals fight IRS abuses. Dan, welcome to Point of View.
Hey, thanks for having me, Merle. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Listen, you and I have talked in the past on Point of View, but now we've had this. I just wanted to bring this issue up to start with. The IRS has been in the news more so than normal the last 2 or 3 years because of Lois Lerner, the IRS challenging conservative groups trying to get a nonprofit status and so forth. Lois has has retired, was able to take her full minutes with her. I think a couple of IRS commissioners have stepped down. Have they addressed the problem there, or is there more that needs to be done?
Well, look at Merrill. The bottom line with that is that she just simply walked away, and Congress did not pursue the question of whether there were any legal violations, whether there was any law breaking involved in what she did. Of course, she denied it, and then she pled the Fifth Amendment in front of the House committee, which I believe was a complete outrage, in my opinion. That certainly everybody's got a right to the Fifth Amendment. There's no question about that. And being a staunch constitutional advocate, I would never argue that somebody should not be allowed to claim their rights. But when you're in a position of public trust like that, I mean, there's certainly got to be some level of accountability, and there certainly was not there in that situation. And so, so the answer is that she got away unscathed, and as you just pointed out, took her pension with her, and I just think it's deplorable.
Have they fixed any of those problems, do you think?
Well, no, I don't think any problems have been fixed with the Internal Revenue Service, Merrill. And in fact, when we're talking about the question of tax reform, they're calling this bill the most sweeping tax reform legislation in 30 years. And Merrill, I don't call it tax reform at all. In my opinion, this is not tax reform. I'll tell you what it is, and then I'll tell you what it isn't. It is a tax cut. Every American's going to get a tax cut. There's no question about that. The rates are reduced, and there's certain other elements in the code that are going to lead to lower taxes for Americans, and we can certainly talk about the specifics. So that's a good thing. It is a tax cut in that sense, and certainly a business tax cut as well, and we can get into that as the program progresses here. But it's not tax reform, Merle, in the true sense of the word, and I'll tell you why. We've got a tax code right now that consists of 4 million words. Tax changes have never been a problem in America. There have been more than 5,900 tax code changes since 2001, and that doesn't even include what happened here in January with the new tax law, with the new tax law that's just been passed. So we've got a constant stirring of the pot. This rule is in effect today, but it's not in effect tomorrow. And as a matter of fact, this tax legislation that we're dealing with now suffers from the same problems that quote-unquote tax reform has suffered from in the last 15 or 18 years, and that is every single one of these provisions, Merrill, that provide relief to middle-income taxpayers is going to expire after the year 2025. Mm-hmm. So they don't even last as long as the Bush temporary provisions lasted in 2001, 2003. And so this is not, people keep calling this tax reform. It's not tax reform. All they did was stir the pot. They did not solve any of the problems of a complex and overbearing tax code that people are suffering with.
Now, there's two sides to this. There's the corporate side, and then there's the individual side. And most people, including me, have talked about the corporate side because I felt that was long overdue, that the 1986 tax law didn't really address corporate income tax, and a number of other countries were lowering their corporate income tax and making us uncompetitive. So I liked that side. It's been harder for me to sort of weigh in on what's happening on the individual side. You remember Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, was going around highlighting the notion you'd be able to do it, fill out your taxes on a postcard. If that's true, it's going to probably be a really big postcard, I suspect. It sounds like they did not get the simplification that we would have liked to have seen.
No, absolutely not. And this is the one reason, if you were going to ask me to explain just one reason why I say this is not true tax reform, you just hit the nail on the head. Nothing was simplified. Okay, we've got some things that were repealed. So a lot of credits were repealed, and certain, the dependent exemptions and so on were repealed in exchange for a higher standard deduction, and that's all fine, and that's going to simplify things a little bit for some people. But here's what the reality is, and this is why from the start I just wasn't buying what Paul Ryan was selling in terms of this postcard business. 70% of Americans already file short forms. Mm-hmm. They file 1040A or 1040EZ. 70% of them do. And for all practical purposes, that is a postcard. All right, all it is your name and your address and your identifying information, and then you got your income and your standard deduction, and you sign the return, and that's the end of it. All right, there aren't any deductions of any significance, at least for the 1040A and the 1040EZ, the short forms. And so for the rest of the 30% of the people, that's not going to change. They're still going to have most of their deductions. The mortgage interest deduction is still in place. The property tax deduction, state and local income tax deduction is still in place with some limits. Mm-hmm. The charitable contributions, of course, are still in place with basically the same limits that have always been in place. There's been miscellaneous deductions that have been repealed, but Merrill, even people that filed the Schedule A and itemized their deductions weren't allowed to claim. Most of them weren't allowed to claim those expenses anyway because of the so-called 2%. Adjusted gross income floor that they had to exceed before you could write any of it off. So it's again, what we're doing here is just stirring the pot. We're not making progress on true tax reform.
Though I would say if we're ever going to get to a true flat tax, you're going to have to address this mortgage interest deduction, the state tax deduction, and so forth. And so, as you point out, they didn't eliminate that, but they lowered it, which seems to me at least a step towards that direction.
Well, some would argue that it's a step toward that direction, Merrill, and I can certainly see how they get to that point. But here's where the scheme fails, and that is if we also at the same time collapsed all of the income tax brackets, like the original Trump plan proposed to do. The original Trump plan proposed to collapse the 7 brackets to 3, mm-hmm. And in fact, when the House put out its report on its targets for tax reform, it didn't go to 3, but it went to 4. So the 7 were collapsed to 4. Well, we didn't get any of that with this tax bill. We still got 7 tax brackets. The top bracket was dropped from 39.5 to 37. Okay, that's some relief at that one end, and that's fine. That's fine. As I said, tax cuts are good, Merrill. We both know tax cuts help the economy. No matter what anybody else says, tax cuts always help the economy.
When we come back, we'll look at what this means for individual taxpayers.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Today is the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. When the Supreme Court removed most state restrictions on abortion back in 1973, who could have predicted the world we live in today? When the ruling came down, few understood the long-term implications. I remember speaking on the issue in college classrooms a few years later and wondering when the Supreme Court would reverse its decision. By the 1980s, it seemed like only a matter of time that abortion would once again be restricted in America. That did not happen. A whole generation of young people have grown up never having known a time when abortions were illegal. They may have seen some protests and may have heard some debate about the subject, but that perhaps is the sum total of their experience. Abortion has left a scar on the soul of this nation, just like the scar slavery left on America's soul in previous centuries. Unfortunately, many Americans cannot see the scar that abortion has left on this country. I see the evidence of these scars when I take phone calls from women who are exploited by abortion. I see evidence of these scars when I hear the cavalier comments of young people about human life. I see those scars when I hear people debate related issues like stem cell research and physician-assisted suicide. But I also see the healing when I see the good work of pregnancy resource centers. I understand from people working in this area that there are 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers in this country as there are abortion clinics. In many ways, the pro-life movement is winning the war of ideas. And I'm encouraged that so many young people, our future leaders, are pro-life and understand the importance of being pro-life. So there are some encouraging signs even as we see the scars left by abortion. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in today for Kirby Anderson, and we have on the line with us tax expert and advocate Dan Pilla. Now, Dan, if I am listening to the media, I think the only people who are going to benefit from this tax reform are high-income individuals. Is that the case?
Well, that's just absolutely absurd, Merrill. The fact of the matter is that what we've got here is an across-the-board tax cut. And in fact, those taxpayers with incomes between about $50,000 to $85,000, what we would call the heart of the middle class, will see tax cuts ranging from about 11% to 36%. I'm talking about cut in taxes now, with the highest relief coming at the bottom end of the scale. And so the lower end, the people on the lower end of the economic spectrum are going to get the lion's share of the tax relief under this plan. And in fact, I think the Tax Foundation estimated that under this bill, another approximately 4.5 million people are going to be taken off the tax rolls, which is something else we could talk about. I don't think that's a good idea personally, but nevertheless,
I agree with you on that.
These lower income folks are going to be taken off the tax rolls, and what we're going to see here is an increase in real incomes under this plan, spendable income for folks, that is, by about 3 to 4%, Merrill. And so this is, as I said, the target, the real true beneficiaries of this plan are right in the heart of the middle class, not the upper echelon of income earners in this country. So it's just an absolute lie that the tax breaks are only going to the rich, and it's also an absolute lie, as you know as well or better than I do, this idea that rich people pay no taxes to begin with is just completely absurd. It's just fundamentally absurd to begin with.
They pay the vast majority of income taxes in the country. But now let's touch on that one point that you made, which is removing more people from the tax rolls. It seems to me that if you're in the country and you're benefiting from the country, the services, the security, the military and so forth, you ought to have a little bit of stake in the game and paying some small tax. But right now, I think we're about the top half, the bottom half of the country pays maybe 3% or 4% of the total income tax return?
Yeah, I'm not even sure it's that high. I think the bottom 50% are paying under 2% of the total tax revenue. The top 1% of income earners are paying well over half, upwards of 60% of all the taxes paid.
And this is a real problem because any kind of tax cut to some extent is going to benefit the higher income and middle income people, because the lower income people, those under the bottom 50%, simply aren't paying much in the way of income taxes at all.
Well, and it's worse than that when you recognize that these people have the right to vote, Merrill. So what they're doing is they're going to the ballot box, they're voting for programs and benefits and quote unquote entitlements that are going to cost a fortune going forward, generation after generation, for which they never have to pay.
Yes. Now you've mentioned that the charitable contributions are still retained here, so we can make our contributions to our churches and nonprofit groups and still be able to claim a deduction. What about the alternative minimum tax? That's been a plague on us for decades.
Well, there's two fundamental problems with this bill that caused me to say it's not tax reform, and that the alternative minimum tax is one of them. The alternative minimum tax, most people don't even realize what that is until they get blindsided by it. The alternative minimum tax is a secondary tax system that runs right alongside our primary tax system. Our primary tax system, of course, is a graduated tax system. The more you earn, the higher a percentage of income that you pay. The alternative minimum tax is a flat tax, meaning that when the alternative minimum tax kicks in, you get you have all your deductions, exemptions, credits, everything like that denied to you, and now you pay a flat tax based on what your income is without the benefit of these deductions. And of course, that ends up being more money for most people. So if you don't pay the quote-unquote proper amount, or you don't pay enough under the regular tax system, this AMT kicks in, and now you've got this secondary tax that applies. And so this is a monstrously complicated system, Merrill, and it basically requires people to figure their taxes using two completely different sets of rules. And as I said, it's an admission. I believe it's an admission that our primary tax system is fundamentally flawed, because if we had a proper tax system to begin with, we wouldn't need an alternative minimum tax, right?
Exactly.
This tax should have been repealed long ago. The National Taxpayer Advocate has been encouraging Congress for the last 15 years to repeal the alternative minimum tax because of its complications in compliance and administration for the IRS. I've been arguing about it for twice that long as being overly complex, and it should be abolished. The original Trump plan proposed to abolish the AMT and the estate tax, which is also an abomination as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. And the original Trump plan proposed to abolish both of those. And the original House plan proposed to abolish both of those, but the Senate didn't have the guts to do the right thing, and so we end up with both of them still.
You've been a taxpayer advocate for decades now, so assume I'm just the average taxpayer, and I'm calling you and saying, Dan, it's 2018. What should I be thinking about this year in terms of preparing for my taxes that have come up that I'll start to pay next year? What should I be doing?
Well, first of all, Merrill, the tax law that we're dealing with right now, the new tax law, applies to 2018 income and expenses, all right? So to the extent that we're getting ready to file our 2017 tax returns, which are due in April, mm-hmm. this new law is not going to have any effect on that. So let's understand that right away. People are asking me that all the time.
Very good point.
Okay, so it's just got nothing to do with 2017. It's effective for 2018. What I think every person needs to do, particularly wage earners, Merrill, is take a look at your wage withholding situation right now. As I said earlier, every taxpayer in every bracket is going to see some reduction in their taxes. And right now, as it is, about 80% of the people who file tax returns, it's probably a little closer to 85% of the people who file tax returns, get a tax refund. Now, you don't get a tax refund because the government got religion and decided to do you favors. You get a tax refund because you paid too much in taxes. And if you're going to be getting a refund in 2017, as I said, most people do, that refund is going to be even a little bigger in 2018, assuming no other circumstances have changed. So you want to adjust your withholding to increase your withholding allowances to cover the reduced tax liability, so you don't let the government hold your money for 12 or 15 months in a situation where you don't owe it. So you need to sit down with your payroll department, or if you got a tax preparer that you use, sit down with the preparer, understand that W-4 form where you claim your withholding allowances, and make sure then that you've got that withholding adjusted so you're not overpaying your taxes in 2018.
Dan, is there a flip side to that? If I don't take enough taxes out and I owe a little bit, is there a penalty imposed on that?
There can be a penalty, that's true, and so you want to be careful because you don't want to get into a situation where you owe the IRS a bunch of money either. And here's the way it works. If you pay either 90% of your present liability, and we're talking about 2018 now, so if you at the end of 2018, if you've paid in 90% of your 2018 tax liability or 100% of your 2017 tax liability, whichever's less, then there's no penalty. You do not, and this is important to understand, you do not have to overpay your taxes. There's no rule that requires ordinary taxpayers to overpay their taxes through withholding.
If our listeners want to call Dan and talk to him, our number is 800-351-1212. 800-351-1212. You can go to Point of View and find Dan's bio there. You can also find a link to his Tax Help Online, where he has been working to provide advocacy for taxpayers, because, Dan, you've been taking over your years, you've taken taxpayers who've been abused by the IRS and tried to address those problems. How has that worked out?
Well, that's primarily what I do for a living, Merle, is the tax policy stuff. You have to be involved just because I pay attention to it and folks need to know. But where I live is with tax dispute resolution. I help people with tax collection problems, individuals and small businesses to deal with IRS abuse prevention and cure and problems resolution. So if you're dealing with a wage levy, bank levy, property seizure, tax liens, any of those kinds of things, that's where I help people. And my book, How to Get Tax Amnesty, which has been discussed on Point of View over the years many, many times, has helped thousands of people across the country to reduce or eliminate tax liabilities they can't pay.
That may be the only kind of amnesty we like these days.
Yeah, no kidding.
So for our listeners, if you want to find out more about Dan, you can go to taxhelponline.com, taxhelponline.com. He has a 1-800 number there. And as I mentioned, his bio and those links are available on Point of View's website, so you can check with us there. Callers, 1-800-351-1212. When we come back, if you want to talk to Dan, you can give us a call and ask him your questions directly. Dan, when we come back, let's see what this is going to mean for for the tax revenue the government's going to be taking in over the next few years, and if that's going to help or hurt us. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And you're back with Merrill Matthews, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. Callers, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-12. If you want to talk to Dan Pilla, one of the country's leading taxpayer advocates who's been doing this for decades. So, Dan, your general sense is the IRS, I've had I've known some former IRS employees. They were great people, but just given the fact that we've seen over the past few years with Lois Lerner and the taxpayer abuse on conservative groups, people need to be aware of taxpayer advocates out there, because sometimes the IRS can be abusive.
Well, there's no question about it, Merrill, and let's take the abuse question out of it for just a second. Let's say the IRS is not unfairly targeting a particular individual. Let's just say, as is the case in most situations, that you as an individual taxpayer find yourself in a position, the unenviable position, of having to make a choice between paying your taxes and feeding your family. All right, this happens because of any number of reasons. There's all kinds of reasons life can throw you a curveball and get you into that position where you've got this impossible decision to make. We've got roughly 25 million people out there that owe money to the IRS that they can't pay. Now, most of those people are not, quote-unquote, abuse victims in the sense that they really don't owe the money. Most of those people do, in fact, owe the money. They just can't afford to pay it. And so now they're looking at IRS enforcement action, because the IRS computers don't stop to ask what happened, what went wrong, why you're in this situation. The computers just want to go ahead and collect the tax. That's why they call it automated collection. They just want to issue the wage levies and the bank levies and so on. So these are the people that need the help to resolve the situation that they're in. These are the folks that can find resolution through any number of programs that are available. In my book, How to Get Tax Amnesty, I talk about 5 different programs that can allow you to work with the IRS to get yourself into a position where you either pay the taxes on your terms, not theirs. That is to say, you get yourself into a situation where they're not running you over to get the money, or if you just simply can't pay it, you negotiate with the IRS to resolve your debt for something less than you owe. And we do that for folks all the time, Merrill, where we go in there and say, look, guys, we owe you $50,000, but there's no way we can pay it, but we can pay $5,000 or $10,000 or $12,000, whatever the number is. And in that situation, you negotiate the settlement for less than is owed, and you get yourself a clean slate.
1-800-351-1212. If you want to talk to Dan, let's go to Carl in Illinois. Carl, you're on the air.
Hey, Dan. Thanks for taking my call. I have a question. I talked with my tax preparer the other day, and based on my 2016 tax return, because we itemized, basically we're going to owe another $5,500 or $6,000 for 2018, based on the fact that you have to have at least $24,000 in itemized deductions before you can itemize. Is that true?
Well, yeah. For a married filing jointly, what's going to happen is the standard deduction goes approximately doubles from about $12,000 to $24,000 for joint filers in 2018. That's true, and so they've increased the zero bracket amount. So it may be a situation where, depending on your level of itemized deductions and exactly which ones you're going to lose, there may be a tax increase in your situation. That's possible. I find it unlikely, but it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I used to claim my mileage and obviously contributions to church and goodwill and other things, and
but you're still going to get the charitable contribution. But let me ask you this question, Carl: are you a wage earner or are you self-employed?
Well, I'm a wage earner. So is my wife.
Okay. Well, as wage earners, you are going to lose your unreimbursed employee expenses, the so-called miscellaneous itemized deductions for mileage and those type things. As an employee, you will lose those. That's true. The question is, are you picking up enough of the standard deduction to make up the difference? And there's another thing, and that is the tax credit is going to double as well, and so that goes from $1,000. Well, that's for children though. That goes from $1,000 to $2,000 for the child tax credit, and so all these things have to be factored in to see whether there's going to be a tax increase or not in your specific case.
Okay, all right. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Carl. And Dan, let's go to North Carolina. Rebecca. She has a question about an important issue, the Obamacare penalty. Rebecca, you're on the line.
Thank you. I was wondering if the Obamacare penalty is still in force for 2017.
It's still in force for 2017, no doubt about that. The tax code changes as far as the Obamacare, what they call the individual mandate penalty, goes to zero, but that's effective January 2019. So it's still going to be in effect for 18 as well.
Dan, do you think they're going to? It's still in effect for 2018, but it strikes me that the IRS may not be that aggressive in enforcing it. What are your thoughts?
Well, you're exactly right, Merrill, and the reason for that is because there's language right in the statute that says they cannot enforce collection of that penalty through wage levies and bank levies, and they can't file tax liens and so on. The only thing they can do is they can offset a state tax refund, or they can offset your federal tax refund to collect the money. Mm-hmm. So that's why there's no aggressiveness as far as the IRS is concerned. It's not because they're kind-hearted. It's because the exclusion is written right into the law that says they can't.
But this goes back to one of your earlier points: is if you aren't overpaying the IRS, then you don't have to worry about that so much because you don't have a balance for them to be able to go and collect anyway. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's true with both the federal and the state. Now, having said that, Merrill, if you're one of those people that would like to negotiate with the IRS to reduce or eliminate tax debts you can't pay, one of the things they will require in that negotiation process is that you get current with your delinquent taxes. And what I mean by that, or I should say get current with the taxes that you owe for the year in question. And so for 2018, if it appears to the IRS that you're going to have another penalty and another Obamacare penalty, you're going to have to make arrangements to pay that or get the insurance, one or the other, so that you avoid that penalty. Otherwise, they won't negotiate a settlement with you.
You know, I never got your take on this. Chief Justice John Roberts decided to go with the liberals on whether or not Obamacare was in fact a viable thing by saying he decided the penalty is going to be a tax, and the government has the ability to be able to impose a tax. So the mandate was, he tied the mandate to have health insurance into a tax, which a lot of us sort of pulled our hair out because we felt like that was sort of skirting the real issue, whether or not the government has the ability to force you to have health insurance, because he made it a tax.
Well, there's two problems with it. And you identified the first one. He just changed the language of the law. Yeah. The law doesn't say anything about a tax. It very specifically describes it as a penalty for not behaving in a particular way. And the court just said, well, it's really a tax because ultimately, if you make this choice or you make that choice and the money goes to the government, it's a tax. Okay, yeah, whatever. All right, he's parsing words, and as far as I'm concerned, it was a cowardice approach to the discussion. The real problem with the decision is the complete destruction of the Article 1, Section 8 provisions of the Constitution that talk about what the legitimate functions of the taxing authority under the Constitution are for the United States Congress. There's only three reasons that Congress can use its power to raise taxes under Article 1, Section 8. They can do it for the general they can do it for national defense, they can do it to pay the bills of the country, and they can do it for quote-unquote general welfare. Well, the term general welfare has always been understood. It was understood by the founders when they wrote the phrase, and it was always understood right up through 1934 with the Butler case that the general welfare meant applying to, that is to say, a benefit that applies to absolutely everybody across the board. It never was sought to imply the idea of taking money from one group of people and giving it to another for a private benefit, which of course is what this health care is doing. And so they did absolute violence to Article 1, Section 8, the General Welfare Clause. And
then, as you know, the Department of Health and Human Services provided a number of breaks there, so that roughly only roughly 2/3 of the people who were uninsured and would have owed the penalty were able to get exemptions from it somehow or the other, so that only about 1/3 of the uninsured actually had to pay the tax, which seemed kind of odd because if it's a penalty that doesn't get applied broadly out there, it's not very much of a penalty.
Right. No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. So they did everything they had to do to twist whatever they had to twist to come up with the conclusion they came up with before they even looked at the law and the facts, and that is we're going to let this thing stand.
The number to call in, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Dan Pilla, tax advocate extraordinaire. If you want to go to his website, it's Tax Help Online. If you have issues you need to discuss with him, you can go to taxhelponline.com, and he will be able to address that if you do that. Otherwise, give us a call, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today on Point of View, and with us is tax expert Dan Pilla. Dan, let's go to Anita in California, who has a question about foster care taxes. Anita?
Hi.
Go right ahead.
Yes, I was wanting to know, as far as foster kid taxes, is there a certain period of time that you can actually file for foster care? Say if the child has only been with you for less than 6 months, can you still file for those children that are in foster care in your home?
Well, I'm not sure I'm following your question here, Anita, on the foster care. Here's what you got to do on the things like that. Now, the IRS has a publication called Publication 17. It's called Your Income Tax. It's a very detailed explanation of various elements of the tax code. They've got a new version of that that's coming out very quickly here to address these changes. Now, I don't think, frankly, the foster care issue has been addressed in the new tax bill. I didn't see anything in it. Merrill, maybe you can chime in on this too, but I didn't see anything in there that deals with foster care. So what you got to do is go to IRS Publication 17, Your Income Tax. There's a chapter in that publication that deals specifically with foster care issues. That's where you want to go to look at that.
Publication 17?
Publication 17, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Anita. Dan, it did deal with the adoption tax credit, did it not? That was an issue we discussed here quite a bit.
Yes, it did. It did deal with the adoption tax credit, and the adoption tax credit was repealed along with a number of the other tax credits, Merrill. No doubt about that.
And what about the child credit? That was raised from $1,000 to $2,000?
Yes. The child credit was raised because what they did is they eliminated dependent exemption. So you no longer get a quote-unquote exemption for your child, but the credit goes from $1,000 to $2,000. And in addition, they added a subsequent aspect of the credit, and that is for non-child dependents, you get a $300 credit. So, for example, if you got your mother-in-law in your house with you, or if you got your granddaughter in your house with you, and you're providing the support for those people, they don't have their own line of support. They're dependent on you for support. Under the old law, you could have claimed them as a dependent exemption. Of course, the dependent exemptions are gone under the new law, but now you're going to get that $300 credit for that person.
But the purpose of most of this was to eliminate various deductions and exemptions and so forth, and then just raise the standard deduction. So where you feel like you might be losing in some areas, you might be gaining just by going to the standard deduction and making it a little simpler. Do you think that's does that work out to help most people, you think?
Well, I think it's going to be helpful, but it's a simplification process that I consider to be a fraud because, as I said when we started the conversation, 70% of the people out there were already in a position where they weren't claiming any standard, itemized deductions. They were claiming standard deductions, and so the bill means next to nothing for them other than the fact that now they've got a higher standard deduction, so less of their income will be taxed.
1-800-351-1212 if you want to call. Now, Dan, what would if you were doing tax reform, what would you do?
Okay, well, I'd bulldoze the entire system.
Does that include the IRS?
I would take the entire Internal Revenue Code to the highest building in Washington, D.C., and throw it out the building. I'd bulldoze the entire system, including the IRS, and start over with a national retail sales tax, a consumption tax on all goods and services at the consumption level, not at the corporate income or not at the business input level, but at the consumption level. And what I would do is I would reduce this massively complicated 4 million word tax code, and I would eliminate this massively complicated return processing system that we have, where the IRS processes about 250 million individual income tax returns. About 150 million individual income tax returns and another 100 million business returns for a total of 250 million tax returns every single year. Merrill, they have to do this. It's massively complicated. It's massively expensive to do this. We could abolish all of that with just a very simple retail sales tax on all consumption goods and services. And if we went the next step and made that tax collectible by the states, we wouldn't even need the IRS at any level to do this.
Dan, we live in Texas, so we don't have a state income tax, and we use the sales tax, and I love that. However, under the fair tax proposal that's been out there, they want to include, at least historically, Social Security and Medicare taxes in there, and that has made that makes the sales tax so high that it seems to me if you had a sales tax without including Social Security and Medicare, the FICA taxes, you might be able to get it a good bit lower and a little more workable. And secondly, the fair tax people said, well, because a sales tax is regressive, let's send everybody a check. And I've never wanted to send everybody in the country a check.
No, and I couldn't agree with you more. You can't. First of all, sales tax is not regressive. A sales tax is proportional, right? A regressive tax hits lower income people harder. A progressive tax hits higher income people harder. That's the kind of tax we have now. A sales tax is neither regressive nor progressive. It's proportional. People pay taxes in proportion to their spending. Lower income people spend less money, so they pay less tax. Higher income people spend more money, so they pay more tax. So this idea that it's regressive is just it's an economic fallacy. They don't know what they're talking about when they say that. As far as so that's number one. The second part, and I understand your argument about retaining the Social Security and the hospital taxes in place. The problem with doing that, Merrill, is we've got a massive employment tax situation that I would like to dismantle as well. Businesses with employees have to file 5 tax returns. They file their 941s, 4 of them. They file their 940. Then they have to file their W-2s and W-3s at the end of the year, and they have to do the withholding. People don't realize this, but about 60 cents of every dollar collected by the IRS is not collected by the IRS at all. It's collected by businesses through wage withholding that have to pay it in to the IRS, all right? So that's what's going on here. And that is a massively complicated system, and it spells trouble for all kinds of businesses for all kinds of reasons. About 66%, 2/3 of every penalty issued by the IRS is issued against businesses who make mistakes in connection with this withholding problem. So I'd like to see all of that go away, Merrill, and I understand it's going to lead to a higher rate. There's no doubt about that. But we have to lay the blame for that where it belongs, with big government spending. That's the reason the tax burden's high.
Very good point. We've in our few minutes left, let's run to Dan in California. He's got a question about inheritance taxes. Dan?
Hi, Marlon. Hi, Dan. So this is what it is my grandmother died. Let's see, my mom died first, then my grandmother after that. So I received inheritance. But, it went in opposite order. Do I owe tax on an inheritance with my mom going first and then my grandmother?
Well, you never owe tax on an inheritance, Dan. The net proceeds of a person's estate flows to the beneficiary, in this case you, tax-free. The estate might owe a tax, but they would only owe a tax if the estate. Well, let's see. When did she pass? In 18 or 17? 2018 or 2017?
2010, I believe.
2010. So I mean, we're talking about a net estate, a taxable estate that has to exceed about $3.5 million before there'd be any tax to the estate. But once the estate pays whatever it owes, if anything, the net flows to the beneficiaries without income tax consequences.
Great.
And Merrill, as long as we're on this subject, this is another area where Congress failed, and that is to abolish the estate and gift tax. This tax, in my opinion, is absolute theft. It is a perfect example of an immoral tax. The only purpose of this tax is to divest families of the resources that they've managed to accumulate legally and peacefully over the life of the matriarch or patriarch, whoever earned the money. And the entire function of this tax is to simply redistribute that wealth.
Thanks so much for joining us, Dan. We appreciate it.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have.
You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. Christians can face a lot of external challenges living as we do in a fallen world, but we can also face some internal challenges, and one of those is depression. Our guest this hour, Tom Nelson. He's been with Denton Bible Church for, I think, 40 years or more, most of the time as a senior pastor. He's a graduate of the University of North Texas and Dallas Theological Seminary, and the author of several books, one of which we'll be talking about in just a minute. Tom, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you, Merrill. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. But before we get to our main topic today, there was the March for Life in Washington on Friday. President Trump addressed that march from the Rose Garden. He's been a stronger advocate of the pro-life movement than I think some of us might have felt like his past would have indicated. And then, of course, Vice President Mike Pence has been a decades-long supporter of the pro-life movement. You spoke out publicly on these issues. Are you encouraged by what you're seeing there?
Very much. A president and a vice president are not simply another two voices among all the other voices. They are key voices. I think years ago, whenever we bathed the White House with a rainbow light, if you remember.
I remember.
It was extremely despairing to me. If it had been merely two voices that had been supporting same sex, it's one thing, but whenever it's the people that are the controlling people of your country, even more so, I think, Merrill, than the Supreme Court, when those voices speak up, it carries enormous weight, and I think it carries enormous weight with God whenever your leaders believe a certain way. And so I am very encouraged, because that was not a big selling point of his election, was his stance on abortion, although it was, but not in any other way. But I think when and everybody expected it of Pence, but when Trump came out and took a stand, I think everybody was uplifted. So, yes, I was very encouraged.
You know, a lot of us said we were depressed when we saw that White House bathed in rainbow colors.
Yes.
And now a lot of people say they're depressed that Donald Trump is president, though I think what they really mean is they're distraught, discouraged, in despair. But depression is actually a medical condition, and it's one you're familiar with because you've had your own battle with it leading up to your 2012 writing of Walking on Water, When You Feel Like You're Drowning, along with your co-author Steve Levitt, who also is a DTS graduate. What happened to you to cause you to write Walking on Water?
You know, in 2006, I began to notice that I was having problems sleeping, and at times my body hurt. And I thought maybe it was allergies or something. My body would ache. And realize my schedule was I would preach for a while. I'd preach 4 times on Sunday, 3 in the morning, 1 at night, and then I would head off 10 times a year, 5 in the spring, 5 in the fall, to around the country to do conferences on the Song of Solomon. And I would speak Sunday, and I would teach Monday morning at 6 a.m. I would teach Tuesday morning at 5:30 a.m., then again at 7. I would teach Wednesday at 6 a.m., and then again at 7 a.m. I would do the staff on 12 o'clock on Thursday, and on Friday I would teach at 6 a.m. at 7 a.m. Then I would run and catch a plane, go teach 3 hours on a Friday night, 3 hours on a Saturday morning, catch a plane, get back, and preach at least three times on Sunday. And I would do that continually. And I did it because I loved it. I wish I'd have had an eighth day that I could have done it. And so I was just running down and didn't realize it. And then one night, when I was in a Sunday night, Merrill, I just got hit. My body, my blood pressure shot up, heart rate shot up, started sweating bullets, and I didn't know why. And the pain in my body began to increase, and the insomnia. And I ended up going to a hospital. And what I look back in retrospect, I was having the effects of clinical anxiety. Anxiety and depression are different sides of the same coin. They're the manifestations of stress. And I ended up, it got so bad that I had to cancel a conference I was doing to record the teaching of Romans, to film Romans, and I canceled it like 24 hours before the conference. That's how, and I've never, ever missed a speaking engagement, but I canceled an entire conference because I simply couldn't go. And I took 4 months off, and I didn't know what was wrong with me, and that's the frightening thing, is you don't know what's wrong. And unless you can talk to someone who has been there or a psychiatrist that knows about it, that's the fear of it, is you don't know what it is. It's not outside your body in a sense, like a broken leg or a hurt shoulder. It's in you. And so I was canceled out, and I thought this may be the end of my life until, believe it or not, one of our elders had a friend who was from India, and he was a Hindu psychiatrist. That's kind of an oxymoron. Mm-hmm. But he was a Hindu psychiatrist, and my buddy shared with him my symptoms. And this guy says, oh, he's garden variety of clinical anxiety. He needs to take an SSRI, a serotonin-specific reuptake inhibitor to build back serotonin that allows your brain to work well. It's called a neurotransmitter, allows your brain to work. And he said he needs to take that, and he used something to sleep. He needs to take what was called lorazepam to sleep. Well, my buddy mentioned it to me, and when you're in that kind of a deal, you will take anything they tell you. I've had people say, how do you square taking medication and being a Christian? And my first thought is, you've never been through this, have you? Because you wouldn't ask that question. You'll take whatever you can to get the symptoms out so you can get to what got you there. And so I'm about 3.5 weeks into taking something, all of a sudden the fog just slowly lifted, and it was delicious to feel normal, to let your body get back to normal. And then I went to a fellow down in Plano that was a psychiatrist that knew more than anybody, and I just said, educate me. What is this? And he listened to my schedule, and he said, man, no wonder you got anxiety. He said, I'm anxious listening to you. And he said basically that a human can't do that. God rigs the world to turn, and every 12 hours, light and dark shut down and start. And he said he makes you stop, and he makes your body produce melatonin. He makes you go to sleep. He makes you build back. And if you turn night into day, which Americans have done, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Americans with electricity and travel have turned night into day. And he said after a while, you run out of gas. And so he said depression and specifically anxiety are both the culprits that come from stress, chronic, continual stress. He said your body can take an adrenaline hit periodically for a short burst, but when you run on it at some point, you're going to get PTSD after. So you're going to get post-traumatic stress. And so I got educated on it, and I went and spoke at Dallas Theological Seminary about it.
Well, and, Tommy, let's come back in just a minute, and we'll pick it up from there.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Today is the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. When the Supreme Court removed most state restrictions on abortion back in 1973, who could have predicted the world we live in today? When the ruling came down, few understood the long-term implications. I remember speaking on the issue in college classrooms a few years later and wondering when the Supreme Court would reverse its decision. By the 1980s, it seemed like only a matter of time that abortion would once again be restricted in America. That did not happen. A whole generation of young people have grown up never having known a time when abortions were illegal. They may have seen some protests and may have heard some debate about the subject, but that perhaps is the sum total of their experience. Abortion has left a scar on the soul of this nation, just like the scar slavery left on America's soul in previous centuries. Unfortunately, many Americans cannot see the scar that abortion has left on this country. I see the evidence of these scars when I take phone calls from women who are exploited by abortion. I see evidence of these scars when I hear the cavalier comments of young people about human life. I see those scars when I hear people debate related issues like stem cell research and physician-assisted suicide. But I also see the healing when I see the good work of pregnancy resource centers. I understand from people working in this area that there are 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers in this country as there are abortion clinics. In many ways, the pro-life movement is winning the war of ideas. And I'm encouraged that so many young people, our future leaders, are pro-life and understand the importance of being pro-life. So there are some encouraging signs even as we see the scars left by abortion. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
This is Merrill Matthews back on Point of View. Welcome to join us again. We're talking with Pastor Tommy Nelson of Denton Bible Church and about his challenge with depression. We have a link to his bio on the website at Point of View. We also have a link to his book, Walking on Water, When You Feel Like You're Drowning. Now, Tom, you were talking a bit about how you were going through this and what was what you were trying to come to some kind of solution. And you said you were talking to someone at the Dallas Theological Seminary?
Yes. Well, what happened is right before we cut away, I talked about how I got into it and got out of it by I had to cut my schedule. The fellow that I went to and visited with, he said, you've got 3 jobs. You got to do one. He said, a human being can't do this. And he said, you've got to cut back. And so I had to get rid of traveling. I had to get rid of, the Young Guns program that I would teach about 4 times a week. For 3 years, I took time off. And then I had to cut it back to just once a week. And so I had to and I think I turned 57, almost 60 years old. So I things I couldn't do, and I had to start cutting back. And but I went and spoke at Dallas Seminary, and I spoke about depression, anxiety as a Christian, because when you go through this as a pastor, you just can't take 4 months off and then show back up. You've got to tell them where you are, and I did. Mm-hmm. Well, I spoke at that, and when it was over, I would guess that on an average, I'll bet every 2 weeks at least, I'll get a call or an email from around the country from somebody saying, I'm having trouble, and I went through this, and I hit the internet, and it gave me Dallas Seminary, and now, could you help me? And I spoke on it about it at for Dobson and at Southwest Seminary, Southern Seminary, and I've just found out that there's a great amount of people that are Christians. Christians won't talk about it. Matter of fact, the guy that I visited with, he was a psychiatrist down in Plano just to educate me, and he said, you want to be careful about sharing this with Christian friends because Christians will moralize it on you. They'll all of a sudden say, well, what's your sin? Or haven't you been reading enough? And he said non-Christians will just say, go and get it treated and then find out what may have led to it. But he said, you got to be careful about a Christian. And so I found out that this was true, that a lot of people will call me because they can't talk to their church. Mm-hmm. And a lot of guys on staff will call me because they can't talk to their church. And so I did a book with a buddy of mine named Steve Levitt, just at what it is literally that's happening to you and what may have led to it and what can get you out of it, both clinically or medically and in your schedule or whatever is leading to it. And I found out it is the leading cause of the leading, what you would call, for lack of a better word, mental illness, something other than just physical, is depression and anxiety. And so I found out there's a huge number of people that struggle with this and just can't talk about it.
You know, you were an athlete. You mentioned that in your book. I was too, and identified with it because as athletes, we were taught you don't quit, you keep going, you finish the path, and if there's some pain coming in, if it's really cold out there or something, you just suck it up and just keep going. Right. And so what you were doing that was sort of fighting your whole need for being able to get treated.
You can't run through this pain. It's not like anything else. You have to stop and back up, and you've got to deal with the symptoms of the depression or the anxiety, and then you have, and we're worlds ahead of where we were even 30 years ago on this. But now you back up and try to find what could be causing this stress. Sometimes, Merrill, it can be just hereditary. A lot of times a counselor will ask, does anyone else in your family have this? Because it can run in families. Mm-hmm. It's something that Luther dealt with, Calvin dealt with, Thomas Jefferson dealt with. I am told, something William Cooper that wrote There is a Fountain Filled with Blood. Winston Churchill called it the black dog that would follow him. Mm-hmm. In the old days, they just called it melancholy. Right. And it was thought to be a sign of genius. As a matter of fact, the fellow that I visited with, he said, if it's any consolation, this doesn't usually happen to bums. It happens to people that are 24/7 on call. It happens to announcers. It happens to TV personalities. It can happen to actors, to where you just basically overload yourself and your body just hits sixth gear, and it can't stop, and you've got to stop it.
There's a twist here, though. We normally think of depression as somebody's had these terrible things going on in their life. They've had this fail. They've lost their money. They're bankrupt or something, and so they go into depression. But you had everything going for you. You had a major church. The church was growing. You had success, and yet it still hits you.
Yep. There can be times that there are enormous events, the loss of a child, a chronic disease that you can't get rid of. There can be times that the stress becomes so great that it can happen to you. But generally, it's with those that are just when Muhammad Ali would fight, he was 6'4", and what he would do is he would bring his left hand around the back of his opponent's head and just pull on the back of his head. He wouldn't hit him, but he would just pull in the clinch and in the break. And when you do that, you have to, your hamstrings, your gluteals, and your lower back tense up to keep going down. And if you'll do that over 6, 7, 8, 10 rounds, after a while, a guy's legs start going away. That's why they try to make you break, and they'll point you if you pull too much. And so he would just pull on people. And that's what it does. It's a constant pull that after a while, your joy is gone. And people don't know how to really deal with it. And so I wrote that book as to what it is, how it came about, the clinical thing you can do, but then you've got to back up and look at your schedule and just look at what may be leading you to this.
You know, one of the things you mentioned in there is that normally when we have a pain or illness, we sort of look at it and say, oh, I've got this ache or a pain or a cut or something like that. So it's your mind looking at your physical body, but when it's your mind that's the problem, it's hard to be able to assess what's happening.
Yeah, it's the apparatus. You're looking through. When you look through a window at the world, you see correctly. When the pane gets smudged, you can't see anything correctly. And depression is the smudging of the apparatus by which you look. That the mind, you realize, isn't this free-floating thing that is perfectly rational and unaffected by stimuli, that your mind is part of your brain, and that is part of the fallen man. And that can lead to all kind of problems, and so it's an illness that you can't X-ray, you can't MRI it, you can't blood test it. You can only talk about it to a person that knows what you're talking about. If somebody talks to me about it, I can ask leading questions, and I'll find out real quickly that they've got it, and if it's depression or anxiety. And I can pretty well tell you where it's coming from, and I can give them a path of recovery if they'll listen to me. But if you don't know that, if you haven't been there, you can't identify it, and you just slowly thinking that it's some moral failing in you that you just have to try harder, and then you become anxious about your anxiety or depressed about your depression that makes you depressed. And that makes you depressed about the depression that makes you depressed. And it's a perfect storm. It's like catching a baling wire in a lawnmower. It'll just keep getting tighter until it seizes up the whole thing, and then you just shut down.
You had a term
somebody can come in there.
You had a term in there that I really like, because most of us understand you get so tired that you collapse physically, but you have the term collapsed metaphysically, and that's just the mind quitting on you.
It happened to Dick Vermeil. You remember him, Merrill, that coached the Philadelphia Eagles? Mm-hmm. And back in the, I guess it was the early 80s, he got where he could not get out of his car. He pulled up in the stadium. He couldn't get out of his car, that his body shut down. And he, in his case, began weeping till he couldn't stop weeping. In my case, I was unemotional and couldn't get emotional. That Dan Rather had suffered with it. I believe Mike, I may be wrong, but Mike Wallace, but I think Dan Rather did. And he said that when you go through it, it's like you could get a phone call that you just won the lottery and you won $20 million and you wouldn't care. You could get a call that your mother just died and you wouldn't care, that you're emotionally gone. And you really, the thing you long for the most is getting your joy back.
Tom, when we come back in a minute, we want to talk about some of the biblical figures that seem to have gone through depression. Callers, if you want to talk to Tom Nelson, the number's 1-800-351-1212. 1-800-351-1212. We're talking to Tom Nelson of Denton Bible Church and his book, Walking on Water. When you feel like you're drowning, discussing the issue of depression and how it affects not only everybody, but especially the challenges it faces, that Christians face when they are facing depression. We'll be back in just a minute.
Why does Kirby Anderson do what he does? Because he believes in God's ability to use you to make a difference.
There's a real need for us to articulate a responsible biblical perspective and to give people an understanding of what is happening in the world, and in addition to educating them, to then empower them to go out and make a difference for Christ.
Together we can push back the growing darkness. It's not going to be easy. But by God's grace, it is happening one person, one community at a time. Join us in this mission. Become a monthly partner. $1 a day, $30 a month will make a huge difference. Or perhaps you can do $100 a month. We need partners of all sizes. We need you. Give today online at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, next to the Donate Now button, click on Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And Merrill Matthews, welcome back. This is, we're talking about depression today with Denton Bible Church Pastor Tom Nelson, who's written a book on this issue and has faced that challenge himself. Tom, when we dropped off, we mentioned, you were mentioning several characters, several people who've gone through depression, well-known people,
Right.
but there's also evidence of that in the Bible, isn't there?
Gracious. There were certainly, well, you know, when you read the Psalms, everyone who's ever gone through depression or anxiety reads the Psalms because they feel like it's written specially to them. And you read some things David went through that you say, that's me, that is me. Of course, Elijah, that he had so hoped that after the Mount Carmel incident that Ahab would repent and Jezebel would be put away and idolatry would be stopped, and you saw this great show of fire coming down, and then he races to Jezreel to see what Ahab would do, and lo and behold, he did nothing, and Jezebel leans out the window and says, your head's not going to be on your shoulders this time tomorrow, and he got afraid, and he fled, and he just saw, you know, he expected great things, they didn't happen. He saw failure in his own life and weakness in his own life, and he just said he thought it was all dependent on him, and he said, God, they've killed your prophets, torn down your altars. I alone am left. They're seeking my life. Kill me. I'm no better than my fathers. He was just so low, and it was at that point, you know, God who had taken care of him through the ravens, through the widow of Zarephath, and now the angel of the Lord personally comes and cares for him. And I remember that, Merrill, because whenever I graduated Dallas Seminary, a fellow named Bob Deffinbaugh spoke, and he shared that story. And he said, there's going to be time you're going to bottom out in ministry. And he said, this is why you'll do it, is that you look for the sensational, you see personal failure in your own life, you think it all depends on you, and you're physically weary. And he said, that's when God has got to come to you. And I'll tell you what, I was there. So I saw it in Moses. You see it in Elijah. You see it in Jeremiah, just wishing that he could be a bird and fly away and get away from it. I'm convinced Paul talked about the daily pressure upon him of concern for all the churches, and God who comforts the depressed comforted us by the coming of Titus. So, yes, Jesus saying that he was grieved to the point of death. I've never, I felt, been that far, but Jesus was grieved to the point of death and said, you boys, come and just be near me while I'm praying. And God had to send angels to lift him up. So, yes, pain is just part of ministry sometimes. It's part of life.
1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212, if you want to talk to Tom Nelson about the issue of depression. And let's go to David in Texas, who has a personal testimony. David, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. Enjoyed listening to that. I don't know if enjoyed is the correct word, but I was reinforced hearing what you guys are saying, because I was one of those athletes that if it gets cold, just play tough, play harder. If you get hit hard, hit harder back, and it goes on and on. As an athlete, you don't accept the frailty that you see in others. You just don't accept that, and you say, I've got to do something about that. But the issue is that when you can't do anything about it, that compounds the anxiety. And
yes, it does.
I'm supposed to be able to fix this. This is what's supposed to happen to all those weak guys. I'm tough.
Yep.
I did this, I did that. It goes on and on. And then you alluded to something else. When you go to wonderful Christian people that are well-meaning, but unless they've been there, they cannot help you. God can help you with prayer. And I know the Apostle Paul said, be anxious for nothing. But I suspect he was quite anxious during his times, and that's a great goal, but doggone, it's tough. But you guys reach around and pat yourself on the back for dealing with this issue on the air to help untold numbers of people that will not share this info with other people, but they'll hear it on the radio and be blessed. And I know you do it for the God be the glory, but you guys, thank you. Thank you. Y'all doing a great job up there.
David,
thank you, David.
Do you feel like the sort of the training of the athlete just forces you to postpone getting the kind of care that you might need just because of the way athletes say, I can't go tell anybody this, I've just got to overcome it?
Yes, and the other thing, you're absolutely correct. The other thing is, I'm not going to take any of those drugs. I don't need them. I'm all state, or I'm all this, I'm all that, and I've always run faster, jumped higher, and hit harder. So I don't need this. Some of these other weak sisters do, but I don't. And that's the worst thing you can do. And I finally had a loving person tell me, Dave, you're depressed. And I almost wanted to hit him in the mouth. No, I'm not. I got some problems. But you got to get a little help.
David, it's an interesting point, because Tom makes that point in his book. Tom, you went through several doctors and in the hospital before somebody finally actually diagnosed it.
Yeah, I had 2 hospital stays and had visited with numbers of doctors until someone that just majored in it said, and it was the most comforting thing, Merrill, I ever heard, when he said to me, or to the fellow that he was talking through, my buddy, he said, he's garden variety, meaning he's nothing weird. He said, I'll tell you right now. And he said, this is what he's got. This is why he's got it. And he said, I'll tell you what he's like. I'll tell you his personality right now. And he hit me dead on. That was the most comforting thing, to find out there was a name for it. And then he said, here's what you need. You need, he said Lexapro. A person under depression may take like Zoloft. Lexapro is for anxiety. And he said, this is what he needs. He's short on serotonin that works between brain cells like a little ferry boat carrying electrical impulse, and it's down. This will allow it to build up naturally. He's not going to feel anything for about 3.5 weeks, and it's going to naturally build back up, and the fog's going to lift. And he was so right. And it was just comforting to know I'm not crazy. I'm okay. And that's why I think, Merrill, that in a church, you almost have to have someone get up and give a testimony, with a pastor getting up and saying, if you're struggling with any of this, come see us, because we have, in our church, we have a number of people that have a small group that people can go to, and that we have contact with very competent physicians that can help them, because you have to have somebody that can prescribe and understand what you need. And you need a guy in your church that's kind of the lightning rod. Come to him. And we have those. So we don't let people just suffer needlessly. They can come to us. And I think every church needs a go-to guy that they can call in a time of when somebody's at the end of their rope.
1-800-351-1212. If you want to talk to Tom Nelson, 1-800-351-1212. Tom, one of the most amazing things I found in your book is how long it took them to actually diagnose this. I'm sitting here thinking, look, maybe it's already because I already know what's happening, but I'm thinking it looks like depression, and yet they're giving you physical tests. They're saying, oh no, your body's fine. Everything seems to be working okay, and you can't seem to find that person who actually knows what's going on.
That was the frustration, is everybody told me I was healthy. And I knew for a fact something was wrong for me. And it was really until my wife spoke to my physician and just broke on the phone. And I heard her. She broke. And she said to him, you've got to find something to help him. And so he called someone outside of his field of expertise, said it, and the guy responded within a breath. I know exactly what he has. And so it was a godsend. As a matter of fact, all during that time, Merrill, it was kind of funny, but I kind of was pondering on that song by Ethel Waters. Remember that? His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. And I was singing that song. I would go out and try to work in my garden, and I'd get my mind off of it. And I was working in my garden, humming that song, and I came upon a fallen sparrow that literally had just died. And he was right there, and it was just almost mystic. And it was like God saying, I know where you are. And then a little bit later, I went over, I decided I'd get a full massage. Maybe that'd help me. I'm walking up to the guy's office, and there is a fallen sparrow right in front of me. I went down to see the guy that was a counselor that might have known something about it. Walking up to his office, there was a fallen sparrow. Isn't that weird? It was like God just kind of went beyond the Bible to let me know, I know where you are. I know where you are, and you just stay with me, and I'm going to take you through this. And he did.
And you had to know your Bible to know that that was going to be a sign for you. 1-800-351.
No one could really say to me that I didn't know my Bible. I had memorized books of the Bible.
Right.
I'd never missed a quiet time. So when they said, have you been reading your Bible? That's all I do for a living.
1-800-351-1212. If you want to talk to Tom Nelson, we'll be back in just a minute.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Merrill Matthews, and we're back with Tom Nelson talking about depression. Let's go to Loretta, I believe it is, in Texas. Loretta, you're on the air.
Well, sir, that was close enough. Mom would call me Lorelda.
Oh.
I'm going to try to give you the abbreviated version because I know those.
Yes, we don't have a lot of time.
Okay. I was at a point in my life, I was already 30-something, but nothing was going right, job-wise, family-wise, otherwise, and kept hearing something say, well, you're worth more dead than alive. And so I thought, well, okay, if I was in Arkansas Hills, and I thought, I'll just turn my truck upside down, and that'll be it, you know. And about the time I had that thought, another voice said, I still want you. And that's when my pastor interrupted because we were in a small group. And he said, did he say want you? And I said, he talks Texan. And I said, yes, Lord, yes. And I just had my 32nd rebirthday I'm still here to praise his name because he was there. I was the one that was wandering.
What a great story.
That's the short version. But like I say, we think so many, and I've had to remind my friends because they think he's just not answering or he's not out there. And I said, well, sometimes he waits until we sit down on that curb and our feet are dangling to answer us.
Yes.
Just that low.
Yes.
Tom, can the Lord use depression to draw people to them?
Oh, gracious. There have been more people, Merrill, led to Christ through depression and cancer and hard times. It's in depression, it's where you're the essence of you just hits a wall, and you can't go on much longer, and you have to stop, and you've got to reach out your hand to somebody bigger than you. And of course, that's the business God is in, is Red Sea events where there is no way to go. That's when he comes to you. And she said it so well when she said it's not a genie that you can rub a bottle and it comes quickly. Sometimes it takes just a little bit of redirection in your life, readjustment, and just resting and just waiting upon the Lord. The hardest part of faith is faith plus time. It was Chuck Swindoll who said, God invented time, men invented watches. And we want a genie. And sometimes all the time, you have to just wait on the Lord as you do the right thing and as you do all that you can do in visiting somebody that's qualified to know what you're going through to help you and try to restore some of those things. Just like if you have diabetes, you're going to need insulin to be able to get you normal. And sometimes you just need somebody to know what it takes and to get you back to where you need to be. Yes, it can bring you close to God.
Let's go to Lisa in Louisiana. Lisa, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Fine.
All right.
I just had a quick question. You mentioned earlier that if you spoke with someone, there were just a few key questions that you could ask them that would immediately identify if they were going through some of this that you're talking about. And my question was, what are those questions?
Yeah, the one thing that I ask is, are you sleeping? Because someone that is going through sixth gear and can't turn it off is they can't sleep. And then you start worrying about not being able to sleep that makes you not be able to sleep. And we can make an elephant sleep. There are so many things that can help you sleep. So you have to get something that along about 5 o'clock, you're not worried about not sleeping. And then another one is, are you enjoying things that you normally enjoy? Like I like lifting weights, running, working in a garden, reading. And I ask them, can you enjoy those things? And I ask them, can you read? Because when you're in a real chronic state, continual state of anxiety or depression, a lot of times you can't read. I couldn't watch a television show and sequence a television show. Another thing I ask them, it is key, is what do you think about going out in crowds? Because you're like, when you have depression or anxiety, you're like an open wound in a world full of salt. And you just will find a safe place and a safe person, a lot of times your mate. And you just get what's called agoraphobic. The agora is the marketplace. Agoraphobia is you're just scared of the marketplace. You don't like to go to Walmart. You don't like to go to a restaurant. You will get I knew of the guy that wrote the book with me. He would get like panicky in a church. He couldn't go to a church. And when I see those symptoms, I know exactly what that person has got. They've got clinical depression or anxiety.
Tom, are there stages of depression? Stages of what I mean is, can you have a little bit of depression versus a lot of depression,
Yep.
or if you're depressed, like a broken leg, you've got a broken
lot of times,
leg.
Merrill, I'll say to guys, it's good that you got it early. If someone could have gotten to me early, I could have done a lot better. But when I see guys, I talked to one of my staff one time that he wasn't sleeping. He would wake up in the night with his mind going that he just get anxious about going into a restaurant. And that's when I stopped him right there. And I said, whoa. we're going to shut down your phone calls. We're going to shut down the hours that you spend. I want you to, when you get home, you stay home. I don't want you to do anything before about 9 o'clock. You cancel that out. And one of the things that's hard, Merrill, is when you're not in a place where your employer can help you. In other words, I had a sense of control. I could say, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. The hard thing is when you're an 8 to 5 guy and you've got to be there. That's when it's the toughest to be able to get them to deal with. And sometimes you just got to take time off. When you're a pastor, you've got to get a pastor to say, I'm sorry, but I'm going to take a month and I'm going to rest. The lady in Dallas, Susan Hawk, you remember that, Merrill?
Mm-hmm.
Where she struggled with depression and she would come back and it hit her again. And I'm convinced it's because she wasn't really able to get a protracted time to rest, and her job was so intense of being a district attorney. I can't imagine anything harder. I don't think she could ever get where she could rest.
One quick last question. We're going to Texas. Go ahead.
Oh, this Nellie?
Nellie, yes.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to know, is there anything I can relate to my sister who is depressed? She's been going through it, and now she's ended up, she had to have one of her legs taken off, and she had to have another one taken off. She ended up being diabetic, which she wasn't a person that eats. She liked to work and this and that, and she worked. I think she's overstressed, and now she said, I'm just so depressed every time I talk to her. I said, well, Steve, you have to depend on the Lord. And I send her materials to read, but because I don't know what they're giving her, what can I say to her about what the nursing home, the rehab places, and what they can give her, if they will? Because she wasn't the type of person to me to get into that position, but I guess it's because she tried to do everything herself.
Tom, we got about 30, 45 seconds.
I'll tell you what, a psychiatrist, all he talks with are people that are going through depression or anxiety. A doctor a lot of times may not be quite so familiar with it. I would say to get your phone book out in the largest city around you, find a psychiatrist and get this woman to go to her, because diabetes or having things amputated can create chronic stress, and it can create depression. Get her to go to somebody, a psychiatrist that can give her something to stop the symptoms, and then she can start working backward to the real depth of a relationship with God. But we need to stop those symptoms of the darkness that is around her, and we have a way to do that.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us. It is apparent there are people out there struggling with this. Tom Nelson, Denton Bible Church, this is Point of View. Thank you for listening.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221.